Alright, welcome back, guys. So in this video, we're now going to talk about the concept of ethics and morality, right? So we're pretty much going to talk about everything we spoke about in the previous video, but we're just going to apply it to that concept of morality, right? So, I'm going to start by asking a question, which we pretty much already answered, but I'll ask it anyway. Where does morality come from, right? So is it truly in the eye of the beholder? And is the concept of moral relativism true? So moral relativism, as the name implies, is basically the idea that morality is relativistic, right? So it's not absolute. It's pretty much a matter of personal opinion, right? There is no sort of absolute reference frame we can all appeal to understand what's true or not, right? It also, from that idea, is also the idea of the concept that morality, the utopian view of morality, is basically the idea that the normal view of morality that most of us have, which has to do with not being selfish and helping other people, things like that. Some people might say what is moral is relative to the person in terms of doing what's best for them, which is basically champions the idea of selfishness. But which perspective is true, right? Well, as we've been saying, right, as you probably know by now, that I believe, of course, that morality is absolute, right, and is defined by the subconscious mind. So, but to go over the second point, virtue and morality is absolutely defined by the subconscious. In other words, just to kind of remind ourselves of what we spoke about last video, it really depends on what you're using to define morality, right? So if you're defining morality or ethical behavior by the conscious mind, then yeah, it could be whatever you want it to be. It could be anything, right? Being super selfish, right, and only looking out for yourself and only engaging in behaviors that that you believe will make you the most prosperous, right, even if it's costly to other people or it sacrifices the well-being of other people, you could believe that those kinds of behaviors are still moral. But that's according to the definition of the conscious mind. The conscious mind can define morality any way it feels, as well as immorality. However, the subconscious is different, right? So if we're going by the definition of the subconscious mind in terms of what's moral or what's ethical, then that's fixed. You can't change it. There's nothing you can do about it. That's determined by God, right? So now it states here, we can know what is moral based on our subconscious response. And so we pretty much talked about that same thing last video. So we talked about how the subconscious defines words and how we can kind of know what the definition of that word is based on our subconscious response. So for example, if you want to know what the perfect or ideal friendship is, all you would do, what's that is basically based on, is how your conscious mind, so your conscious mind will, the abstract component of your conscious mind's intention, right, will express some parameters that describe some relationship, right, and your subconscious will switch to whatever frequency most best fits those parameters, or best allows your perception to become altered to perceive a relationship that has those parameters. So, as you keep producing intentions that fit certain parameters more and more and more precisely, right, eventually your intention will reach an endpoint, right, some endpoint intention, which we call form intentions, and it'll express relationship parameters in a most ideal way, right? So you'll feel some frequency or you'll feel some emotion most purely, right, when you're on that ideal frequency or when you produce that ideal form intention, right? So in other words, that's a subconscious form, that's an abstract subconscious form related to a relationship. So if I do that with a friendship, right, so if my intention expresses parameters of some friendship, right, and or if it expresses parameters of two people interacting who my conscious mind would perceive as friends, right, but if my intention expresses their relationship parameters, I might feel the feeling of friendship a little bit if they're only a little bit, if I only see them as a little bit friends and I express the relationship parameters to my intention, my subconscious will switch to a frequency where I feel the feeling of friendship, not that strongly. But as my intention expresses the parameters of relationship, in a more ideal way, or if it expresses parameters that more closely match the friendship frequency, which is another way of saying that what I'm observing more becomes a better and better approximation of their subconscious form of friendship, right? Then I will feel that feeling of friendship more and more and more strongly. So I'm kind of going over it again, rehashing it, but we really spoke about that in the last video. But you can do the same thing with morality, right? So focus on a set of behaviors. So even using the reflection principle, let's say you see two people interacting, right? Let's say someone's engaging in either moral or immoral behavior, right? Well, as your intention, through the reflection principles, as you're producing intention that reflects the context of what you're observing, your subconscious will switch to some frequency. Now, if the context of what you're observing is a good approximation of moral behavior, right, then your subconscious will have to switch to the moral frequency in order to alter your perception to perceive the parameters that you think you're seeing on a conscious level. And when it switches to a morality frequency, or frequency of virtue, right, or I should say, the better the approximation of the behavior you're seeing is of morality, the more deeply or the more purely your subconscious will have to switch that frequency in order to alter your perception to perceive morality. So in other words, morality is a subconscious form, right? It's a subconscious form that has associated with it a particular arrangement pattern of behaviors, right? So it's an abstract form. Just like relationships have an arrangement of parameters, of relationship parameters that describe them, or that they're associated with, as it relates to abstract subconscious forms, so does morality, right? So if I see two people interacting, engaging in moral or immoral behavior, my intention will express their behavior through the reflection principle, and has their behavior becomes let me put it another way. Let's say that I'm observing two people interact, and I'm producing intention through the reflection principle that's copying or reflecting the behavior that I'm observing. So let's say one person goes up to a person and says hi or something. My intention reflects that behavior. I might feel a little bit of the moral feeling or moral emotion reflecting that behavior. So in other words, you might say, well, it is a little bit more moral to say hi to someone. Now let's say that person, one of the people say, I need money or something. The other person gives them money. My intention reflects that behavior too. The abstract command component of my intention reflects that behavior. Now my subconscious will then switch to a moral frequency. So it'll probably stay on that frequency or switch a little more deeply into it. So I feel the feeling of morality a little deeper. So that tells me on a subconscious level that that's moral behavior. Now let's say that one of the people then sticks up the other person, they pull out a weapon and stick them up for all their money. Now my intention will reflect that behavior too. Guess what? The feeling of morality is going to completely go away at that point in order for my subconscious to alter my perception to perceive the context of what's happening. And it does that. That tells me that sticking up a person for money is not part of the morality frequency, because my subconscious could not stay on that frequency in order to alter my perception to perceive the context that I believe I'm seeing, which is stealing from someone. So stealing is not a part of the subconscious form morality, right? So we can keep playing that game over and over and over until we get a pretty good idea of what morality is and what set of behaviors constitutes morality, right? So that's how the subconscious would define morality, and that's how the conscious mind would kind of figure out how the subconscious defines morality. And going over this next point, it pretty much goes back to exactly what I said in the previous video. So I said that if it is true, right, that there's a base or absolute reference frame for a lot of our beliefs and the feelings that we have about how good things are, or about how good certain forms of entertainment are, or things that we consider beautiful, then it should be the case that things that are really, really, really good approximations of subconscious forms, most people should share the same opinion about it, right? And that turns out to be the case with things that are entertainment or things that are entertaining to us, that are generally good approximations of some subconscious form related to entertainment. It's true of things that are beautiful, but it's also true of what we consider moral, right? Most people, certain behaviors are really, really, really good approximations of the subconscious form morality, right? And other behaviors are really good approximations of the subconscious form immorality. That's also a subconscious form with its own arrangement pattern. Now, most cultures share beliefs about what is moral/immoral due to the absolute nature of the subconscious. So most cultures consider it to be immoral to steal, right? Most cultures consider it to be immoral to lie, right? Most cultures consider violence generally to be immoral, right? Now, of course, you have to engage in violence under certain circumstances. However, if you're really just doing it for almost no reason at all, right, then it's considered to be immoral. Or if you're doing it just for your own personal need for revenge or letting your emotions out or something like that, it's considered to be immoral, right? Most cultures believe that because of the absolute reference frame. Now, you might say, well, some people might say, well, that isn't true because a lot of those behaviors, which we would call immoral, are really considered immoral because they would just destroy society if people engage in those behaviors, like lying all the time, or stealing, or engaging in violent behavior. Now, what I would say is that that's mostly a tautology, right? So what I mean by that is, by definition, if something is immoral as determined by God, of course engaging in that behavior is always going to lead to destruction. So both are true. Both would obviously be true in that if you assert one, right? Now, it's okay, so then what circumstance might you look at to sort of demonstrate this principle? What principle might you say is not clearly destructive to society, but is still immoral, right? What might not necessarily be destructive to society if this wasn't true? Well, a good example of that, in my opinion, is sex work and pornography. So those behaviors people have really been engaging in those behaviors since the beginning of time, right? Or some form of them. I know there wasn't always computers around, things like that, but they've been engaging in illicit sex work, right, for some time since the beginning of time, right? Now, but here's the funny thing about it. If you notice, that type of behavior has been considered immoral in every society since the beginning of time. Why? Wouldn't it be so much easier, right, if something like that were just considered to be moral or just accepted in society, right? And it has been accepted in some societies culturally. However, no matter how much you try to accept that kind of behavior, deep down, everybody knows it's immoral. It's always treated immoral. It's always treated as a type of taboo. Now, I know there are some countries, right, where people are more comfortable sort of being nude and things like that, but that's different from sex work, right? It's different from illicit sex work. And that type of behavior has been considered immoral or taboo in every society from beginning of time, and no matter how hard they try to make it legitimate, they just can't, right? There's just something inside people's spirit that tells them that this is wrong, right? And no matter how hard certain societies have tried to fight that feeling, they can't do it, right? Where does that come from? That comes from the absolute nature of the subconscious. And it comes from the fact that God is the one who says that that type of behavior is wrong. It's not us. There's nothing we can do, no matter how much we'd like that behavior to be moral or be okay or not feel immoral to us. It just does, right? And that's because of this principle, right? So that type of work is considered immoral as determined by God. Oh, actually, before I move on, there's actually something I did want to talk about, like one other thing. So I remember I was seeing this, I think it was a TED Talk, right? I was watching this thing online about this woman who was a sex worker, right? And she was trying to it was almost like she was trying to shame people for sort of saying that she was looking down on society because society looks down on sex workers. And she's trying to kind of say that people should be more accepting of them, and it shouldn't be seen as this, like, this taboo sort of behavior, right? And I'm like, look, right, so I know how the subconscious works. I know how these things work. So I know exactly what's going through her mind. What she's thinking is the thing inside of her, which is her subconscious, but the thing inside her spirit that tells her that what she's doing is wrong. She thinks that that's some belief that was planted in her mind, right, by society. I see it all the time. I see and I'm actually going to get into that a little bit in this next section. But I see it all the time. It always happens when people who do immoral things, right, try to justify their immorality, right? They always think that it's society who planted some thought in their mind to make them think that what they're doing is immoral. And if they just get society to get off their back and accept it, then they won't feel that. They won't have that feeling anymore. No, right? Society is completely accepting. There's way too accepting of sex work and pornography and things like that. That isn't the reason you have that feeling of morality in you. In society, no matter how hard they try to accept that behavior, they can't do it, right? Nothing they do removes that feeling, that inner knowing that what you're doing is wrong, right? In other words, she thinks that feeling is coming from society. It isn't, right? Even if everyone in her life told her sex work was perfectly fine, she would still have that feeling inside her. And that feeling comes from this, right? The absolute nature of the subconscious. There's nothing you can do, no matter how hard you try, to make something that's immoral seem moral to you. You can't. Actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about that here. But specifically, God is the one who determined that sex work, illicit sex work, pornography, all that stuff is wrong, right? And that feeling, that numbing feeling in her, that annoying, gnawing feeling at her conscience, right, that keeps telling her what she's doing is wrong, which is her subconscious, right? She thinks that's coming from society. It isn't, right? And that's true. And I'll get into it in a little bit, but that's true for all people who engage in that type of behavior. I don't know. It's just annoying to me because I see that all the time, right? And once you start to get used to the subconscious and thinking in terms of the subconscious, you're going to see it too, right? You're going to see this thing that criminals do, or people that engage in immoral behaviors do to try to justify their morality, which actually brings me to this next point, right? So why do people engage in immoral behavior if it is absolutely true that they know it's immoral, right? There's nothing, they will always feel this feeling of immorality. Well, because of this principle. So it is still possible to perceive virtue or morality and bad approximations of it due to form morphing. So basically what that's getting is exactly what I said before, right? Like, I can still, what the degree to which something appears as a subconscious form to you, or seems to have the arrangement pattern associated with some subconscious form, is always based on two parameters. It's based on the way it's actually arranged in reality, having nothing to do with you, but then it's also based on how your intention has charged your subconscious to alter the way what you're looking at appears. So it's also always based on those two parameters. So it is possible. Let's say there's some behavior that's a really bad approximation of morality, like stealing, and it's a really good approximation of immorality, like stealing. So it is still possible for me to alter my perception of the behavior of stealing to make it look moral. I can still do that. So I can alter my perception to perceive the subconscious form of morality in immoral behavior, right? And this is actually going over this next point. This is what criminals are doing when they're constantly using sophistry to defend their immoral behaviors. So when you act like a robber, right? Well, why did you steal? It hurt the people you stole from. They'll come up with some nonsense about how, they'll be okay, or, a lot of people in other countries who steal from Americans, through like online scams and call center scams, they always use this ridiculous sophistry, right? They'll say how, the Americans, they have money, or they have insurance, or if they steal from the rich, they'll say, the rich people take from society anyway, or something stupid like that. And they'll always come up with these nonsense explanations. But here's what they're actually doing on a conscious level, or a subconscious level / conscious level. when their intention expresses their behavior, because what will happen is they'll focus on their behavior, which was stealing from someone, and their intention expresses a context that says they stole, right? And when their intention expresses that context most directly, they feel their subconscious switches to a frequency. In order to express that context, it has to switch to the immorality frequency, because that's the arrangement of the context basically represents an arrangement pattern, both concrete and abstract. And when their intention expresses that arrangement pattern, the subconscious has to switch to the immorality frequency for them to perceive that context. That tells them that what they did was immoral, right? Stealing from someone, right? However, when they feel that immorality, right, they don't like it, because it tells them that's their conscience or their subconscious telling them that what they did was wrong. So what they do is they'll kind of dilute the context. So what they'll do is they say, I stole, yes, but wait, what I really did was I established some form of justice, right? So I was born this way, and I didn't have all this stuff, and this person's rich. So actually, it's a form of justice that I stole from this person, and now things are made right. Because justice is a form of morality, right? So justice is a good thing. You have a positive response to the subconscious form associated with justice, right? So what they'll constantly try to do is change the context to make it look more like justice rather than like stealing. Now, if they do that, right, then yeah, when you dilute the context and make the subconscious form or the arrangement pattern look more like justice, then your subconscious will have a more positive response. So you can do that with any form of immorality, right? Any form, whether you're stealing or lying or hurting people or whatever, you could alter the intention or alter the way what you did looks to make it look more like another subconscious form that is positive. And every criminal does this. That's the only way they're able to keep engaging in criminal behavior or immoral behavior and not sort of feel terrible about it. So that's why they're always when they're using sophistry to defend their actions, what they're actually doing is producing intention that changes the context of their behavior to make it look more like something moral. And they have to do that because if their intention just directly expressed what actually happened, which was they stole from someone, they would feel terrible, right? They feel terrible because their subconscious is charging at a negative frequency, right? And that frequency tells them that what they did was immoral. Their subconscious compels them to know that, right? On the level of intuition. Just going over this next point. Oh, yeah. I don't know if I want to talk about that yet. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say. Oh yeah, no, actually, yeah. This next point actually is what I want to go over. So the four-morphing effect is limited in that immoral behaviors will always feel a little negative, and moral behaviors will always feel a little positive. That's basically what I'm saying here. So what I mean by that is, it's kind of like, it's kind of a weird example, but I think of it almost like special relativity, right? So special relativity, which is theory made by Einstein, right? Do I want to get into that? I'll get into it super quick. So there's actually a phenomenon, special relativity, right, where they talk about something called a space-time interval, right? So if there are two events, right, that happen, the distance between those two events will be different depending on the reference frame that you're in, right? And they, a lot of times what they use, actually before I even get into that, it'll be different depending on the reference frame. So basically, for different observers, right, at different locations, the distance between the two events could be different, right? And it depends on it's basically dependent on the speed of light, right? How fast or how soon light reaches them. And light always travels at the same speed in a vacuum. Now, the space-time interval, or the metric for the space-time interval, is generally considered to be, depending on the convention you want to use, is generally going to be the space distance. You consider that to be x squared, or x squared plus y squared plus z squared, minus time squared, right? Now, depending on which interval you want to go in, right, or excuse me, depending on which reference frame you want to move to, those values change, right? But they can change. So the x value, if the space values decrease, then the time value increases. But the total value is always going to be constant, right? And if you're dealing with a if you're dealing with a time-like interval, right, then you could make it so that the space value drops to 0, right? And then time is purely, then you're only dealing with the time value. So it increases to some maximum value, which is generally called tau in special relativity. And that's usually the one they use for time-like particles or events. They generally use that because that's the one that's going to be the same for every reference frame. So what's the point in saying that? Well, basically what I'm getting at is that the space-time interval, it changes, right, or it morphs, right? But for a a time-like interval, no matter what you do, you can never morph it in a way where the time component disappears, right? And so two events can't happen at the same time if you can't make the time component vanish. And so that's called a time-like interval. So that's exactly how it is when you're form morphing. I mean, that's exactly how it is when it comes to form morphing moral or immoral behavior, right? You can charge your subconscious to make a moral behavior seem immoral, right? Or you can charge your subconscious to make an immoral behavior seem moral. You can do it, and you will feel some of the morality feeling when engaging in an immoral behavior. However, right, you can never do it to the degree that the negative feeling or the feeling of immorality vanishes. So that's very important, or it completely goes away. So that's actually a fail-safe. I consider that to be a fail-safe by God, right? To basically as a way of making sure that we always know when we're engaging in immoral behavior to some degree. So it doesn't matter if you think God isn't real. It doesn't matter if, whatever your circumstances were or whatever someone told you, right? You always know when you're doing something wrong to a certain degree. So, for example, let's say that I steal from someone and my intention adds all this sophistry and all this context to try to make it seem like it was moral, right? So if I steal from someone, oh, this person hurt me. Technically, they're rich. They won't be hurt. They have insurance. I was hurt my whole life. It should be this way, or it's a form of justice. Let's say I'm adding all that nonsense to try to make it seem like what I did was moral. I will feel some immorality because I'm changing the context. So my subconscious will respond to that larger context that looks a little more like justice, a subconscious form of justice. However, as long as some part of my intention expresses what I actually did, which was stealing, I'm always going to feel a negative feeling. I can't get rid of it. There's nothing I can do to get rid of it and not feel that negative feeling. No matter how hard I try, I will never be able to look at produce an intention that expresses stealing, the context of stealing, and feel a purely positive feeling. It's impossible, right? And the subconscious won't let you do that. And again, that's a fail-safe by God, so we always know when we did something wrong. By the same principle, it also works for morality. Let's say that someone told you that forgiving others is wrong, right? Or let's say someone hurt you so badly you don't want to forgive them, right? So your intention is altering the subconscious form of morality in that case. So the moral behavior is forgiving someone. When you alter the context of that behavior to make it look immoral, if I forgive this person, they're just going to do it again, or they don't deserve forgiveness after what they did, or they hurt me too much, or something like that. If you say something like that and you're going to feel bad forgiving them because you've now made not forgiving them look more like a form of justice, and you've made forgiving them look almost like an immoral form, or a form of, I don't know what it would be called, a lack of justice, right? Which is bad. And so you feel bad forgiving them. However, right, no matter how much you try to change the context to look like something immoral, you will always feel a sense of goodness by forgiving someone. What does that tell you? That tells you that forgiving someone is a moral behavior as defined by God. There's nothing you can do to get rid of that good feeling if you forgive someone. It doesn't matter what they did or how bad their actions were, or how much they hurt you, right? If you feel they legitimately want forgiveness and you forgive them, you'll always feel good about it. You can't get rid of that good feeling, right? And the reason for that goes back to this, that you can't morph the context of a subconscious form. Really, it applies to all subconscious form, but specifically looking at morality, you can't morph the context in such a way that some moral behavior, you can make a moral behavior seem completely negative to you. You can't do it. It's impossible. And that's actually what I was talking about in this other situation, right? So when porn stars, people who engage in pornography and illicit sex work, they think that negative feeling is coming from society. It isn't. Society is fairly accepting of that behavior. The only reason they're not accepting of it to the degree that they are, which isn't much, is because of this. Because they can't, right? No matter how hard you try, right? You cannot engage in that kind of behavior and completely feel it's moral. God simply will not let you. It's impossible, right? So, for example, if I steal from someone or I lie, I will never feel the way I feel like if I save a child from a burning building or something, right? So if I save a child from a burning building, I'm going to feel good. The reason why is because it's moral behavior. I will feel perfectly good. There won't be any part of that behavior that, I feel like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. There won't even be a tiny bit, right? Just kind of gnawing at me. At least I can adjust my intention in a way that makes it feel that way. That's the natural way it'll feel anyway. But I can, no matter how much, I can adjust my intention in a way that makes some negative feeling completely vanish or completely go away, right? And it feels perfectly good. If you can do that with some behavior, then it's a truly moral behavior. With a truly negative behavior, there's nothing you can do to make it feel perfectly good. It's always going to feel at least a little negative. But I can make it feel perfectly negative, though, if I wanted to. Why? Because it's actually a negative behavior. So, and that's why people who engage in negative behaviors, they always have their conscience is always eating away at them. And they keep trying to put it on other things and put it on other people. That's the exact fact I'm talking about here. They constantly morph it to try to make it feel less bad. They're trying to reduce that negative feeling that God is putting on their heart, right? Through their subconscious and through the mechanics of the subconscious, right? Because they know what they're doing is wrong, but they want to feel like it isn't wrong. And they want to feel that moral feeling. Like people who save kids from burning buildings or help people and give, they don't have that. Their conscience isn't eating away at them like, man, why did I save that child? You know what I mean? Like, it's not like they don't have to do the whole sophistry like, no, it was good to save the child and, you know, children shouldn't be hurt and they're the most vulnerable. They don't have to convince themselves that what they did was right. They just know it is, right? But people who engage in immoral behaviors, they're always doing that. They're always trying to convince themselves and engage in some type of sophistry and tell themselves that what they did was correct and all of this and that, right? And they have to because their subconscious keeps telling them that what they did was wrong. And the only way they could try to avoid it, that negative feeling or reduce it, is by engaging that sophistry or that prevarication, right? So that's something you're going to see. I want you to, even in the future, when you see criminals or people that engage in immoral behavior, when you see them defend their actions, you're going to see them always doing this, always trying to change the context and morph it and do some like Matrix type of things like Neo to try to avoid just focusing on the directness of their own actions. Because when they do that, they're just going to feel negative and there's nothing they can do to stop it, right? And that's due to the absolute nature of the subconscious. So, now there is a limit to how well the subconscious can tell you if an action is moral, and that gets to this point here. You notice I said that the subconscious defines morality in a very particular way, and you'll always know based on how you feel. When your intention expresses certain behaviors or expresses a certain context, the better approximation that behavior is of morality, the more you're going to feel morality when your intention expresses that behavior. The better approximation that behavior is of immorality, the more you're going to feel immorality when your intention expresses that behavior. However, again, there is a limit to it. So in the limit, I'll just read this off. So your subconscious can tell you if a behavior is moral or immoral based on some context you present to it, but it can't tell you if that context matches reality. So basically what I'm getting at there is that I can produce any intention I want to, and my subconscious will respond to my intention, and it'll tell me if some behavior is moral or immoral. But it can't tell me if the context that expressing my intention is true in reality. So as an example, let's say that I think I use this example in the book. Let's say that there's some poor person on the street, right? And they ask me for money, right? So I'm like, well, I don't know what they're going to use let's do it another way. Let's say they ask me for money for food. Excuse me. So let's say that they ask me money for food, right? And I'm like, sure, no problem. I give them money for food, right? And then they don't use it for food. They use it instead for drugs. They buy drugs with the money I gave them. They overdose. I don't know how expensive they are, but just going with the example, let's say they buy drugs, use the money I gave them to buy drugs, they overdose on it and they die, right? That's bad, right? And they did that with the money I gave them. Now, was the behavior of giving them money moral or immoral, right? Well, that's the thing. It depends on how you define it, right? Now, because you can say, yeah, but the subconscious is the one that defines morality according to what we're saying. So the subconscious probably says that that's moral. Not quite, right? Because the subconscious is only going by the intention that I expressed. So if my intention expresses the context of give this person, this vagrant, money for food, right? My subconscious will probably say that's moral. Now, of course, I still have to express the context of how much money I have and things like that. But my intention expresses all of that. It expresses how much money I have, how much it's going to hurt me. It expresses the character role of the vagrant, right? It says that, they don't have money. So all of that is expressed in the abstract component of my intention. Now, if I express that context, which says I'm giving them money and they're going to buy food and their suffering will be reduced that way, my subconscious will say, yeah, that's a moral behavior. Now, if my intention correctly expressed the idea that, or if my intention expressed the context of give this vagrant money so they can buy drugs and overdose and then die, my subconscious would have said, no, that's immoral behavior to still give them money, and then I would have known not to do it. So you see, the intention, it doesn't really matter what happened in reality. The morality of the behavior as defined by the subconscious is solely defined by what my intention says. It's perfectly possible for my intention to express some context that doesn't happen in reality. You know what I mean? There's no reason reality has to match what my intention says. And the subconscious is only responding to my intention. So from the perspective of my subconscious, it was moral to give them money because my intention told my subconscious that I was doing it for them to buy food, right? If they didn't end up buying food, then yeah, in other words, the morality, what my subconscious told me was moral, doesn't have to fit or match what actually happens in reality. So that's very important because our subconscious can only tell us, it's like basically we can give our subconscious a context and our subconscious can tell us if that context, what behaviors are moral relative to that context. But that context doesn't have to match reality. Our subconscious can't tell us what the moral behavior that's going to actually match reality is. Now, what was I going to say? So, oh yeah. So now, while that's true, right, the subconscious can't tell you what moral behaviors actually match reality. What there is a way you can still know that. So there's actually another failsafe in nature which says that no, you can know what moral behaviors also match reality. So you're not engaging in moral behaviors like the one I mentioned in the example. You're not engaging in behaviors you think are moral but actually lead to negative outcomes, right? Because in the larger context, they weren't moral, right? There's a way for you to actually engage in moral behaviors that will always lead to the positive outcome in the larger context because they actually match reality. Now, your subconscious mind doesn't have that information. To get that information, there's another level of awareness that you have, a fourth level, which we haven't spoken about yet. So you have the body, you have the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, then you have the conscious mind. Then you have another level of awareness, which is called your higher self, which that can tell you what moral behaviors, that can tell you what behaviors are moral that actually match reality. So you can almost call those super moral behaviors. So we haven't spoken, we're going to talk about that in chapter 9 and 10 in book 2, so that's way down the line. But just know that there's a way, nature even has a fail-safe for that. So you're not just blindly sort of doing your best to guess which behaviors are moral or not, right? There's a way, God made it so that you can even know how to engage in behaviors that are moral, even in the larger context. It's information your conscious mind doesn't have, your conscious and subconscious mind doesn't have, but your higher self mind does have that information, so it could tell you which moral behaviors to engage in. So that's pretty much it. That's it for this chapter. There were some things I forgot to mention. It's kind of hard to remember everything to mention in these videos. Oh, there was another thing I forgot to mention. I might make another video about that. Arguments. Yeah, there is one other thing I wanted to mention, which I'm going to mention in the next video, which that's actually not in the book. It was in the early versions of my book, but I took it out, but I'm going to mention it here. So yeah, we're almost done with the chapter. There's one other thing I want to mention about the nature of arguments and arguing that I just think I might as well mention it here before moving on to the next video. All right, so yeah, thanks for watching. That's it for now, and I'll see you next video.